Good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about John Lewis and then a bit about the process essay, since when you all come back on Monday and or Tuesday, or Monday or Tuesday, you should be prepared to discuss the process essay and peer review on the process essay. So John Lewis writes this article in 2020. I believe it's 2020. Let me see. Um, I believe it was 2020, 2020, 2019, 2020, 2020. And a few days before he ultimately passes away. In the article, John Lewis walks through his life of activism. He begins by saying, "While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspire me." And his you is talking to us. We are his audience here. And he says that he has been filled with hope about the next chapter of the great American story because of us. He says that before he passes away, he goes to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C., and then he was admitted to the hospital. He then begins to look back over his life, and he says that Emmett Till was his George Floyd, and Emmett Till was murdered in Money, Mississippi, 68 years ago on August 28th. So I'm recording this on August 29th. Let me check. Yes. So 68 years ago yesterday, Emmett Till was murdered. He had just turned 14 a month before, and his mother sent him to his family for the summer from Chicago to Mississippi, and he was beaten, shot, had his eyes gouged out before a weight was tied to his barely 14-year-old body and thrown into the Tallahatchie River. And John Lewis is a 15-year-old in Alabama at this time. John Lewis also compares the murder of Emmett Till to George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. And John Lewis says that fear began to constrain him like a prison, and he began to think about brutality that could happen to him for no reason. We know now that Emmett Till, the story had been for so long that Emmett Till had whistled at a white woman. And even though that did not necessitate a death sentence, for some people, it excused the very bad behavior of those who murdered him. But we found out that Carolyn Bryant, the woman who accused him, actually lied about the entire thing. So knowing this, knowing that doing nothing might still get you killed, John Lewis begins to fear for his life. And so he thinks about his family and how much his family loved him, but also that having that loving family could not protect him from people who didn't love him outside of his family circle. He says that a walk to the store for Skittles or a jog down a road might end his life. And he is referencing the murder of Trayvon Martin and the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. So then he mentions the Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina, where 9 parishioners were shot and killed during Bible study by a young white man who came to visit their church, who they welcomed in, who they allowed in, and he murdered them. He also mentions a concert in Las Vegas where 500 attendees of the concert were shot. And then he mentions the death of Elijah McClain, who was killed by police using ketamine. So he says because of all of those reasons, he was searching for, he says, a way out or a way in. And he hears the voice of Martin Luther King on an old radio. And he learns about the discipline of nonviolence, the way of nonviolence, how to not respond to someone who is injuring you by injuring them. And he says that we have a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When we see something that's not right, we have to do something. We have to say something. He talks about democracy and how it's not a state, and how we have to do our part to build a beloved community, so a safe space for us to exist. And he says the way that we do that is by ordinary people with extraordinary vision getting into good trouble. And the ways that ordinary people with extraordinary vision can get into good trouble are by voting and participating in the democratic process. And he says the vote is the most powerful agent that you have in a democratic society. He also says that we must study and learn the lessons of history, that we must know that the truth does not change, that the answers and solutions from his generation will still work for this generation, that we have to continue to build union between movements across the globe and put away our willingness for profit. He says if we can do all of that, if we can answer the highest calling of our heart, if we can stand up for what we believe in, if we can demonstrate the way of peace and love and nonviolence, and if we can believe that that is the more excellent way, then freedom can reign. And so he closes by saying, if all of that happens, when the historians of the 21st century note what happened in our generation, in your generation, then they would say that we laid down the heavy burdens of hate, and peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So he says, walk with the wind and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. So, we think about the process essay. This is a directional process essay, and a directional process essay asks you to walk through the steps of something, to plot out the process of something, to talk someone through what is required to do something. So our process essay here is you using John Lewis's essay and pulling out the pieces of the process that he outlines. So your introduction will begin with a brief biography. You will do some research and cite your sources about who John Lewis is, what he's done, and the legacy he leaves. You will then talk a little bit about the essay that we just discussed, or that I just discussed, and how the essay helps you understand activism. You will quote John Lewis's essay in that introduction. You will talk about what the essay is intended to do, who it's for, and how we can put the words to work. And then you will close with a thesis statement that explains what the completed recipe should make. John Lewis's thesis statement comes from the beginning of the essay, and he says, though I may not be here with you, I urge you to something. Wait a minute. I'll come back to that because it is somewhere else that I can't access at the moment. But something like, though I won't be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart. Something like that. Oh, there you go. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. So, but your thesis will be what the recipe, John Lewis's process, what it will ultimately make. If you follow these, if the generations that come after John Lewis follow these instructions, then we will be able to make, so some sentence like that will be your thesis, and that will close out your introduction. The next part is I hope that you have printed the essay by John Lewis, because that will be helpful, because you're locating about 15 or so ingredients in the process, beginning at John Lewis's catalyst moment. And the moment that changes his life is the murder of Emmett Till. So John Lewis's path to activism begins when he is 15 and he learns about the murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till. And that happened in the third paragraph. Is this the third paragraph? I need to flip to the, yes. It begins in the third paragraph. So that's where our steps begin. That's where our recipe begins. And everyone's first ingredient will be the murder of Emmett Till. Everybody. That is the first thing that happens to John Lewis. That is the first thing that he uses in his path to activism. The murder of Emmett Till. And so you will then read through the sentences and decide what is key from each of those sentences. So, for example, fear is another likely ingredient. Troubling thoughts might be another likely ingredient. I'm still in that in the third paragraph, but our beginning recipe paragraph. And then in the next paragraph, you might note that he says that he was surrounded by parents, brothers, sisters, cousins. So those might be ingredients for you. The love that was surrounding him might be one. Unholy oppression. So you're looking for these, some of them are nouns. So thoughts, brothers, sisters, cousins, parents, oppression, violence, terror, so on and so forth. So you're looking for nouns or things in the essay. And each of those things or nouns is an ingredient that John Lewis uses on his path to activism. Martin Luther King, for example, the discipline of nonviolence, and so on and so forth. So there are far more than 15. So you should not have trouble locating those nouns, those things, people, places, objects that John Lewis uses. So that's the second step, step 2. And then step 3 is to write out how John Lewis uses each of those things. So you're looking for the verb that goes with that noun. So surrounded by loving parents, plenty of brothers and sisters would be a step in the process. Or so there's a sentence here that says, if we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in the hearts. So discover what takes root in the hearts would be a step in the process. We must discover the root. So if root is one of your ingredients, then discover what so readily takes root would be a step in the process. So you're pairing each of the ingredients with a step in the process. Surrounded by loving parents, brothers, sisters, and cousins. So adding the verb to your nouns. The first one, the first step in your process would be Emmett Till is murdered. And then so your ingredient would be the murder of Emmett Till. And so ultimately you walk through beginning at that third paragraph all the way to the end where John Lewis says, let them say it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate. So laying down is the action, and hate would be the thing that is being laid down. This last sentence, so I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. So if the wind is one of your ingredients, then the step would be walk with the wind. And then if the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love are ingredients, then the step would be guided by the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love. So in other words, you're pulling out each of the, well, not each of them because they're a lot, but you're pulling out the significant nouns in John Lewis's essay, and then you're partnering each one of those nouns with a verb that explains how that noun is used. The same way someone would do in a recipe where you say, so a cup of flour is the thing. So how do I use that cup of flour? I mix a cup of flour, or I sift a cup of flour. So we're pairing the thing with the action in order to create a desired result. And you're walking through Lewis's life of activism, ultimately ending with his parting words where he tells us what will come of all of these actions. So that's the process. And then you will choose 4 pictures that show what that process would look like. So maybe you have pictures of John Lewis. Maybe you have pictures of a unified nation. Maybe you have pictures of people getting along, pictures of protests or Black Lives Matter Plaza, or Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, so on and so forth. So you choose what the pictures of your recipe would look like. And then your works cited page comes next, where you cite the sources for the essay. So that will be the New York Times. You are going to cite the essay. You will cite the source from which you got John Lewis's biography, or however many sources you use to develop John Lewis's biography. You will also cite the source you use for the recipe template. What recipe did you pattern yours off of? That's the citation. And lastly, so let's see, the pictures, the template, the essay, and the biography. So wherever it is that you get your pictures from, you want to also cite those sources. All on your works cited page and all in MLA. And then check your formatting. So is your heading on the page your name, my name, the course and section, the date the assignment is due, and then you have a title that you create that mentions John Lewis's essay, because that's what you're using to create your recipe. You want black font, white paper, 12 point, Times New Roman, and your assignment should be double spaced. So your first order of business is to print the essay, and then you want to highlight or underline those nouns that are in here, and then start partnering the nouns with the verbs that show how each of the nouns is used. There is a recipe step-by-step that is in the module on Canvas. So that's what I walked through with the 7 steps. It looks like this. And this is what you are following to create your recipe step by step using the essay from John Lewis. And I think that's enough to get you started. Let me check the schedule really quickly. Yep. So when we come back, we will be doing some peer review. So you should have your process kind of structured out, what it will look like, so that you can exchange that with a classmate and you all are going to give each other feedback. And there also is a sheet for you to do your peer review, and I will have that for you. I will not always print them for you, but I will have them for you this first time. And you should have your printed recipe ready to exchange with a classmate on Tuesday. So I don't have the peer review sheet here, but they're in my office. So you will have the peer review sheet available for you to review someone else. Okay. So stay healthy, stay well, stay safe, and I will see you all next week.